Cool.
Hey.
Hello.
Cool indeed. Guess this is the bit where we wait for Jamie.
Hi, Jamie.
I don't know if he's arrived yet. Okay.
We don't have a moderator.
We did designate Michael, though, just in case we had an emergency.
All right.
Emergency protocol, Michael.
Emergency protocol kick in. So whilst we wait for our moderator, Jamie, I guess we should do a round of introductions. And perhaps we can start with you, Debbie. And could you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Debbie. I'm the CEO of Team 17, and this year is my 34th year in video games. Over to you, Lindsey.
Hi, I'm Lindsey Rostal. I'm a partner over at Kowloon Knights. I'm also a developer and run my own studio and have been working in games for over a decade now. So part of the funding side and the development side as well. Michael?
Hey, thanks, Lindsey. So I am a general partner at Makers Fund. We invest in gaming companies globally, and we started the fund about 3.5 years ago. And we're basically a venture capital fund, invested in about 56 companies in the gaming industry. So this is quite an interesting setup because we have a moderator, and Jamie, unfortunately, is a bit delayed. So what we're going to do is we're going to totally freestyle it. And I understand we were talking about a little bit about the gaming industry, financing in general. So now, perhaps a really interesting place to start would be with Lindsey. And Lindsey, since you're working with Kowloon Knights and you're also you run your own studio, maybe you can share with us a little bit about how you're seeing the market, the kind of things you look at Kowloon, and how things have changed in the last 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all have slightly different funding models that we each represent. So I think it'll be cool to kind of tackle those different pieces. At Kowloon Knights, we primarily function as project financing, and just as a fund, we partner with studios that are ready to take the leap into self-publishing and bringing their own products to market and being able to release them that way. We've signed about 38 games to date, of varying scales, like down to $100,000 to multiple millions. But we're really looking for teams that have a high level of execution and understand what it takes to not only make their games but to release them, which are pretty difficult and disparate tasks that you need to manage from there. As far as the market, what we've really seen and why we were created was to enable these studios to take that leap. We saw that with the different tools that are coming about and the way the platforms are changing, both at the console level and obviously the PC level, that the opportunity was there for certain studios to be able to say hey, I just need money. I need the support from a financial side of things so I can, create my vision, and then I'm going to handle this release. I've done it before, or I just understand it, and I would like to share more in the success of my title. And so seeing how, patch systems have changed, you're no longer charged $25,000 to, release a patch or anything else. You're able to release your title directly and then continue to support it. And even create, longer term success. We felt that was really important to kind of enable studios to be able to take that leap. So that's kind of a primer on the Kowloon side of things, where we operate solely from a financial side. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, Jamie.
Hello.
Yes.
We can hear you.
We can hear them, Jamie. We can hear them. That's good. We can see if you can do better.
I guess, Debbie, I can toss it to you for the side from Team 17.
Yeah, sure. Team 17, About 6 years ago, we went from being what I would say was a self-publishing creator of our own content to forming our games label, which was pretty much inspired by the music industry and the film industry. Having been a developer for a few decades prior to that, we've sat on both sides of the fence. One of the key things that we do, slightly different, I guess, is we kind of do the whole food chain, from helping people create games as well as funding all the way through to launching and post-launching. From our experience, one of the things that we'd witnessed in our first couple of decades was a developer. When you ask a developer traditionally what do they want, they will often tell you they need games funding and they will need some marketing support. What we've seen over the last 6 years, specifically on our games label, is around 80% of our partners actually need support creating the base game, which is where we opened up all of our games resources to them. So they have access to programmers, additional game designers, artists, etc. But equally, we provide game funding where they need it, but also take care of things like, helping them create the base game, taking the games onto other platforms, and utilizing our internal QA and usability in areas like that. We work with many partners all over the world, too many to mention right now, a lot not announced, and I'm not allowed to announce. And we're having a great time. So, Michael, over to you.
Yeah, I think, so we're on a slightly different angle of funding. So we focused on kind of equity financing. So we actually invest into the company itself. And I think a really simple way to think about that is we're more invested into the company and the team and less focused on a single game. Often we will care about the game or the product or project that's being worked on, but ultimately we think about what's going to be the next 7 to 10 years and the future of the studio or the team that we're backing. So often we will actually work together with financiers or publishers, and essentially our goal really is the same, is to create a successful either a game or a team or a company in the long run. And so when we invest, it's pretty much something between the range of $1 to $10 million. We tend to help a bit less with things that Debbie mentioned, so things like the QA and actually building the base part of the game, and focus more on things like the product strategy or the kind of the general market and how it's changing, and launching globally, hiring, these kind of broader topics that we get quite a good view on because we've talked to so many studios around the world. And so, yeah, that's a bit about what we see. And just to shine one comment on what I think I'm seeing and what the pandemic has affected the industry, I think it's actually, as we all know, it's been a really positive force for attention perspective. And what I'm finding really interesting is we're in this space now where we're in this unprecedented level of interest from every angle. So it's not just kind of the publishers or the public market investors. We have venture capital funding, we have UA financing, we have private equity, we have M&A, private investors, generalist investors, and so you have this interesting time where it's getting a lot of attention, and I think that's what the industry needs. But also, I think the people would also, or founders should also benefit from understanding what's the difference and what's the objective of all these people as well. That's me. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Have I seen slowdown? So no. I would say in the first 3 months, so January to February to April, there was a bit of a slowdown, and this is more due to things like GDC being cancelled and a lot of limbo, and at least in the kind of early stage studio / venture backed studios world, a lot of advice from friends and investors to say, hey, just wait until there's a bit of stability in the world or you can travel. However, I would say when we sit June onwards, the summer, everything just suddenly picked up again. And I think that was, it was after the first series of lockdowns, people came out of their houses in the US, people tried to plan a normal life. And this is before things became a bit pessimistic again. So actually, in contrary, we've seen a lot of activity. And I expect it to continue through to kind of end of November, and then December, I think traditionally things get a bit quiet anyway.
Yeah, over the last 6 months have been pretty interesting. I'm out in Los Angeles, so California was quicker to act in certain ways, and not only from the Kowloon side, but from my own studio, we made sure to lock down. From a financing side of things, I agree with Michael. Like, there was a moment where everyone had to figure out what was new, and people weren't quite pitching because you're like, oh, it's fine, we have E3, like E3 is coming, it'll be okay, like we'll just take our pitches and work with them for that. And then obviously a few weeks later you're like, oh wait, there is no E3. And so I think like once that shift where it was like, oh, we're never seeing anyone in person over this summer, like Gamescom's not coming, people really started shifting their pitches far toward digital. Like at Kowloon, we've always taken digital pitches. Our team's globally distributed, so you don't often get all of us at once. You usually start with one person, or you send it to us and run from there. So we find that that's really important. And also we talk to our devs about the importance of including videos often too, if you're going to walk through your pitch or even your playable, because sometimes you don't get to do that same conversation component in selling yourself too. But like for us, we saw a bit of a slowdown while everyone had their moment of, oh, I'm going to come out of quarantine as a butterfly. I'm going to work out and learn to make sourdough. And then got a little sad and then realized, oh, wait, we just have to like carry on. And I think that mentality and everyone figuring out how to make remote work, this, conference included, has been very important as we all adapt and figure out what's going on from there. And that's why we've also seen an influx of new pitches and people concentrating on how not only are they going to make their game, but how they're going to make their game remotely. And that gets discussed a lot in production plans and executions and talent hiring, because now hiring is completely changed from where it was before for a lot of studios, because they get to pick up anyone from anywhere. So we've found that gets included in a lot of the decks that we talk about.
Yeah. And Debbie, obviously you've seen both sides of it. You've had investment, and you're looking at acquiring companies as well. How's it been for you? Have you managed to keep up the kind of number of companies that you're seeing and the games that you're playing?
Yeah, I think really interesting. Just one quick thing I just want to say, to throw back on a comment Michael made right at the start. I think this is one of the wonderful things about the games industry today. Team 17 is coming up to 3 decades old. In December, we turned 30 years old. For 2 decades, it was a nightmare to get finance and funding for independent game studios. Very, very hard. We had no choice, but, we were a developer for 2 decades for a reason. That was the only way that we could get our funding. And I just want to reiterate what Michael said there. Seriously, it's a wonderful time for games developers, and also for content creators, whether it's equity investment, project investment. There's lots of choice and opportunities, which absolutely wasn't the case for most game developers, as little as even 5 years ago. So I think that's just a great thing for the whole industry to take pride in, of what we've done over the last 5 years. I think the last 6 months, I've spoken to you a few times, Jamie, over the last 6 months. I think what's really interesting for us, I think just in general, we, the games industry, the people who work in the industry, we're incredibly agile. We're very flexible. We love facing into challenges and fixing problems. That's what we do in our daily lives anyway. And so we rally as a group, and we respond very, very proactive. My own teams, we've been in lockdown since March, and obviously the UK is in lockdown right now, and we will remain in lockdown to keep our people safe. You know, that's our number one priority. Our product acquisitions team, I have to give massive respect to them. We actually signed more games in the first half of this year than what we have done in any previous year in the last 6 years. And a lot of that was we made a very, very conscious effort. We knew game developers were suffering. We knew that they were missing events. And we had to jump online. We were online a lot more than what we would have been. Because we were working from home, our work days changed around. You know, we were working early mornings for Asia. We were working late evenings, more flexible. That time that we would normally drive to our offices became working time as well. You know, and so this whole flexible home working approach has ensured that we've been far, far more proactive. You know, and I know Ben from my team is part of this whole event that you guys are doing today on the product acquisitions thing, you know, and I'm sorry, Ben, if you're listening, you're not going back into work anytime soon. And I know you're missing your friends, but we're working great from home.
To pitch online, and that you've done this in the past as well. I mean, what tips do you have for games companies that are looking to pitch online? What should they be doing to make sure that they get their game across and their company across well in this sort of situation where it's on video?
I think there's a combination of things, which also leads to like, what kind of pitcher are you? Are you good in a room? Do you prefer to like talk through things, or are you someone who would prefer to let the deck speak for itself? And so in that realm, like, make sure you're also creating sort of 2 pitch decks often. The long form one, which is like you're sending that into someone in which you won't be able to speak to them, as well as the one where you get to walk through it. And also highlight when you reach out to someone, send your preferred version, right? And be like, hey, I would like to walk you through this on the phone. Do you guys have time to do that, to hop on Zoom? Like, initiate the version of the pitch you would rather do. And don't always rely on that. Like, we might not have time and say like, oh, can you actually send the long form? That's easier for us to review. But often I think it's really important, because normally you would be controlling like, hey, we're prepping our pitch for GDC. We know we're going to do these in person. We're better in person. We're just going to all rally for that as a date. And since you don't get to make that decision, you need to take control of that when you're reaching out to, you know, different financiers and figuring out what's going to work for them. And also know who you're reaching out to, right? So make sure that you are catering it toward what they're looking for and how they work. If they're like, hey, we have a whole team that has to green light it before it can even go into a real pitch, like, know that. Like, and sometimes that information is hard to find. Sometimes it's easy to find. These, you know, events help make some of that easier to find because it gets published in like the forms. But like for us, we have, you know, a form you can actually just fill out on the website, and feel free to say, hey, I would love to walk you through this. And then we can like schedule those things up from there. And you might only get one person from the team because our time spread like thin as we receive lots of pitches, or it'll be like, okay, we can get more people, or in the next stage we'll bring more on. And so like, we also know that it's hard for the developers, and we want to adapt to what's best for them too. So my main tip is like, know what you're good at and build your pitch also toward that, because the opportunities have changed to all being digital. And so, and same if you don't like the live mode of having to pitch to someone and that makes you anxious, that's when videos are huge. Hey, I can walk you through the deck in a video, or I can walk you through the build in a video. We do watch them. So like, feel free to like send that along to be able to communicate your idea. Because I'm communicating everything in a deck is not always the easiest.
No, exactly. And obviously you're talking about project funding there, but you know, with Michael, you know, with Makers Fund, you're often looking at companies' investment as well. So are there any particular things that you would need to see that would be different from, say, what companies would be showing Lindsey?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And I think one of the most important things anyone who's seeking any type of financing should do is probably do a little bit of research ahead of time on the person you're speaking to and the type of financing that they tend to do, right? I think that most people are familiar with publishing nowadays, so they automatically will say, hey, I need this much to get to this milestone, and these are the kind of timelines I'm working towards, and this is my budget. I think that if you're speaking to a fund, a venture capital fund, or somebody who's investing in equity, what they really care about is probably more about the team, the story. Why are you doing what you're doing? What's your motivator? Is this kind of your magnum opus? You've worked your whole life building MMOs for other people, and you've got this great thing you never got a chance to do, and now's the perfect time, and you've got you and your kind of band of brothers and sisters to go do it, right? And that's the kind of story that I guess myself as a venture investor, we want to hear. We want to understand why you're doing this, what motivates you, what's going to keep you going when you're burning the midnight oil. And so that's something that I think is typically less important when it comes to a publisher pitch. And secondly, I think what I've seen is a few mistakes as well, and someone literally takes the publisher pitch and pitches it to me. And so in the publisher pitch, you probably get about 75% of the presentation is telling the storyline. Like you're setting the scene, you're like saying, hey, you walk into a dark room and you can imagine the cold dripping water and everything. You get that kind of style, like the Ubisoft green light meeting kind of pitch, right? And it works for those kind of companies, but I think for a venture investor, they kind of care more about why are you building this type of genre? What are the market trends? Where are the kind of the more macro market size? Why is it interesting? And why are you the perfect team for it? So I think these kind of questions will be going through my head as I speak through a pitch, and I hear what the founder is interested to pitch and talk about.
Obviously, the returns that you want on your investment will be very different. Like Debbie, I'm sure your conversation with companies will be very different to Michael and Lindsey as well. I'm sure you all have different ideas of what your return on investment would be.
Sorry, I think I missed the first part. Jamie, what was the first part? We lost you for 1 second.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, sorry. I was just going to ask about the return on investment and how it differs for each of you. And I just wondered, what's your priority for return on investment when you put your money into the company?
Yeah, we have look, I've done the whole raising private equity finance, and I've done obviously the IPO finance, and when you're doing equity ROI, that's very different to project ROI. Project return on investment, you're looking today at digital life cycle over a game, even an average game is probably 3 to 5 years. Digital talk about game, Worms is 25 years old, right? And the original Worms game is still selling today on Steam, and when you look at digital life cycle, it's a minimum of 10 years of a quality game at the top end. So we probably have less pressure in terms of an ROI base. We look at franchise building long term more than anything. It's not necessarily always about game one. It's about the bigger picture of where that brand and franchise is going. So we take a longer term view, but at the end of the day, our priority, part of what we do on our label, and that's really a big priority for us, is trying to help development studios become sustainable. We talk about a lot, when you say you're a games label or a publisher, it really often gets narrowed down into it's all about the game and what the game will do. Actually, not from our point of view. We're trying to help build sustainable studios around the world that can have that long-term vision, and build and plan for the future. Like, I love what Michael said there about the equity side. Honestly, my experience, and I've done the PE and I did the IPO fundraise, which, IPO was 108 million sterling and private equity was $20 million. I can tell you it's all about the team. It's all, the team is number one, and the vision and the business model is 2 and 3, and so it's very, very similar. I don't think we sit here and go, actually, we want a 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 times ROI. It's actually a much bigger picture than that when you're looking at a publishing side, whereas I'm sure on the finance side, they have much more fixed ROIs.
And Lindsey, how does it for yourselves? Your more project investment. What sort of return on investment are you looking for?
For us, we're about finding the risk that we like for a certain game and team. Like obviously we want to make our money back and hopefully like at a 1x, but we are open to a variety of risks. We've passed on projects that we knew would make money because it wasn't the kind of content or team we ultimately wanted to support. And so ROI isn't always just about money as well for us. Even when I say we're a fund, we are also about building up the industry, building up new creators, taking those risks on teams that maybe need someone to believe in them to take that step towards self-publishing and becoming more than they were just before. And so a lot of our partners, we also have looked into financing their second games after what we're already funding, right? So we financed their first one and we have a good experience and they come back to us and are like, hey, do you want to do the next one? And so for us, we also don't take 100% recoup position. We want our developers to be able to receive money from first dollar. And because we don't have as much overhead in all of those different pieces, we can do that, right? And so it allows us to have our developers see some of the, success themselves, which helps them to then push forward on their next game. Because I think we've all in the past been in that position where while you're finishing the current game, you don't know if it's going to make any money. So you don't know if you can make payroll 30 days out from finishing your game, right? And even if you put margins in for the completion of the game, there's still that scary position of like, what's this hamster wheel going to look like when I'm like in a full pitching mode while I'm also in shipping time, which is a really, like as a, creative lead, it's a really hard brain position to be in when you have to like be chasing the future in a certain way and also trying to make sure you get out the door. And obviously that scales dependent on team size and who can handle what. But for us, we're really looking for, we'd love to make money on the projects. Making money allows us to keep doing this, right? Like, so like to say that we don't need to make money is false because proving our model allows our model to continue to exist is something where we don't have to take that 100% position, where we can allow these people to take on self-publishing and allowing us to reinvest in those studios and potentially grow this into something much larger in the future, right? Because when we make this work at a smaller scale, that proves it. We can get more financing to then take on larger projects and help studios continue to grow and change from whatever grouping of letters you want to use, triple I to lowercase a's to whatever the new situation is from there, and allowing that growth pattern. And so not only for us is it money, but seeing these studios continue to take those steps. Yeah.
So Michael, it was interesting, hearing Lindsey there say just, one times return on investment would be good. And, it's heartening to hear that it's more about money for certain investors, but I've heard some VCs say they want 30 to 50 times the return on investment. So what is it like for yourself? What are you looking for when you put put $5 million into Unit 2 games? What are you looking for?
I don't think anyone would say no to 30 to 50 times anything. Regardless of how much we love the industry, you can get that. Hey. That'll be great.
Well, that's good. We can all agree on 30 to 50 times. That's fantastic.
No, I think ultimately for us, because we're looking at a lot longer time horizon, right? So I guess if a game does well in the short term, we don't necessarily take any rev share or profit from the short-term success of a game. Equity investors, they only benefit when the company eventually, like Team 17, they IPO or they get acquired by a different company. So for us, therefore, there is probably a higher bar for thinking about returns. Ultimately, games that tend to last, and I really like Debbie's phrase here, games that are like kind of long-lasting franchises or just have very long life cycles in general, tend to do well from a kind of returns perspective, right? Because if you look at games, even mobile games, right? And I know that probably those of us in the room now probably veer more towards PC historically, but A lot of the listed gaming companies have done well on mobile games purely because it's just the same game generating profit year on year consistently, right? Like Candy Crush, $1 billion last year. So it's something that is a lot more stable, predictable, and tend to get a lot better returns when the company actually exits. So equally, when you get a game like Warframe, right, and it's a 7-year-old game doing kind of record profit year on year as well. These are the kind of games I think that investors like VCs would be interested in, right? And that means, so on the flip side, games that are probably a bit more hard to predict or have a very short life cycle are less attractive. So premium titles that maybe would sell for because it's a flat fee and no long-term revenue, or they don't have like a long life cycle of engagement, that those are typically less attractive to equity investors. And one of the main reasons is because they just don't take any of the profit or rev share at all, right?
Yeah, and that's really important, isn't it, for developers to, if they're considering what kind of investment and funding they want, to make sure they're pitching to the right people, really. Exactly. It's like because they wouldn't come to you, Michael, with we've got a one-off project, it's a small out there indie game, which it would be more likely to be Team 17 and Lindsey, Kowloon
exactly.
Knights.
I think, for example, we would be a terrible person to speak to if you were looking to fund Cuphead, right? Or any huge like Dead Cells. Like we would just say, oh, I'm sorry, this doesn't make sense for us. But if you then speak to someone like Debbie or someone like Lindsey, it's kind of the perfect candidate. And so it really is horses for courses, right? And equally, I'm sure that if someone came to Debbie and said, hey, I want to make this like free to play game, but I'm going to need $25 million to even get to a prototype, you might be like, maybe I'm not the right person to speak to, but speak to my friends over here.
I think that what you're describing there is what we're missing at the moment, isn't it? It's that ability that you might be in a conference outside somewhere and you're talking to someone and you say, your Cuphead game isn't suitable for us, but hey, Debbie, Lindsey, just round the corner, come and chat to us. And it's that kind of serendipity, those moments that we get at GDC and conferences like this one as well at MEGAMIGS, where you have those kind of chance things. So how do companies meet investors and funders in this situation? Is it through events like this, online events? Is there anything else that you can do? Can you reach out through LinkedIn and Twitter? And what should they be doing now?
Sure. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, sure. You go ahead, Debbie.
Okay, a huge part is network, right? Look at your networks that you have. We very similar to many. We have games that are submitted via a website portal, but also where our acquisitions team are out there looking all over the internet at all times. But equally, we have a huge amount of games that get sent in as recommendations. Ironically, from people sometimes that they may even view as our competitors, who actually aren't quite our competitors because they don't do, some of the things that we do, and they feel a team needs it. We even get games sent from platform holders, to us. Also from competing publishers, from fund managers as well. The reality is build your network, LinkedIn. Twitter is great, but remember, you post on Twitter, and if somebody doesn't catch it within a split second, it's gone. It really is down to your network, and don't be afraid to reach out to people. I always say, if you don't try, the answer's always no, right? So try, connect up, talk to people, and don't be afraid to reach out wherever and aim high as well. You might be surprised certainly this year, a lot of execs across the entire games industry are more available because they're not traveling so much. They're happy to jump in and do more calls. They're happy to do a lot of things that they can't possibly do in a normal situation. So don't be afraid to ask. Just reach out.
Yeah, Lindsey, would you say that as well? And some good advice there from Debbie?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all looking for good content, right? And so that's the hard part of our job, is to find the good stuff. And so we're scouring just as much as you are, basically. And so if you have something of interest, like maybe you're not someone who has, you're not going to try to do a viral Twitter thing, but you can, find one of us there and reach out on a DM. You can, as Debbie said, use LinkedIn. Like, we check all the things. Sometimes certain portals are slower than other ones just because you don't open all of them all the time. I think there's always like someone on your team who's a hardcore LinkedIn person and someone else who's a better Twitter person. But there's still
I've yet to meet a
access.
hardcore LinkedIn person, so
It's definitely not me. But finding those points of access, and it might be sometimes a little slow, might be fast, but like we are open to those things on those ends. I think the hardest part is like full cold calls. If you are pitching something that doesn't match us is usually the most part where we get annoyed, where it's like, oh, if someone's like pitching me, they have a new design for a basketball hoop. And I'm like, that's not what we do. Like, why are you pitching this to me? Or something like very like, I'm making a new word processor. And like, that's, we'll get random stuff and you're like, but that's not, they're at a certain level. So I think we all are aware of what's out there, and we all want good games to exist. We want more fun things to play. And so the ways we can enable that with one another are important to us too. So.
Michael, I'd like to ask you a slightly different question actually, which is more about how much is it a barrier to getting investment when you've no proven kind of track record? Because it's something that I hear from VCs quite a bit, that it's sometimes a red flag. Is it more of a red flag for you than it would be, for example, for Kowloon Knights and for Team 17?
I guess it really depends on what stage you are with your company or your game or whatever you're building, right? So I've backed plenty of people where they've never made a game, they've never started a game company before. And really what I care about is, it goes back to one of your prior questions, actually, Jamie. It's the story. Like, why are you building this? What are the circumstances on your life and your career to date that have led you to making this? And can you show me that you have some kind of deep, intense insight in something that I believe is fresh or interesting, right? Or alternatively, maybe you've already built something and it is showing really interesting traction or engagement in a certain community. So one interesting profile that we recently backed is a team that basically they had built and designed escape rooms, right, for most of their careers, and they happened to come into this COVID world where it became extremely irrelevant, right? But what was really interesting is the way they think about design and player experiences. It was like so fresh hearing how these guys thought about it, because they thought about puzzles and solving things and working together and cooperation in a way that I guess you don't see as often in the gaming world. And they wanted to make a very casual game centered around video, right? And so these guys had never made a game before, but it was so fresh. We just decided, let's take a shot. And so to answer your question, the answer is no. But we really want to know is what and why. Yeah.
And Debbie, I've spoken to you about this before. You've obviously taken a punt on people that have made games out of their bedrooms and things, haven't you? So.
Yeah, I think I've made a punt on people who've never made a video game and worked on building sites and made their first video game. Right. Look, I think we probably have a slightly easier job than both Kowloon and Michael to a degree. And a lot of that is down to, the game studio that we have in multiple locations, right? We can take a person off the street who's got a phenomenal idea, and we can help them execute that vision. And that is a very big part of what our games label was set up to do. So, I did share with Michael and Lindsey before we got on our call about multimedia fusion and the Escapist. We had to Google what it was at that point. We didn't know what it was. And that was what the Escapist was made in. And what we did, we built a team. We built an internal development team to sit alongside Chris to help him execute his vision. And that's part of what we do. It's not just about funding. It's that side. So I do it all the time. you know, games that were made by people working in cinemas and DIY stores. You know, people have stopped asking me about, you know, how's my roofer getting on? I kind of just explain that it's quite wealthy these days, you know.
Fantastic. Lindsey, I'd like to ask you something slightly different in that what are the things that you're not looking for at the moment? So have you been inundated with like Fall Guys clone pitches at the moment? You know, what are the things that, for example, that, you know, that perhaps trends, that things that are going on that you're interested in? Are there particular things that you're not looking for at the moment from companies to pitch to you?
There's not anything specific, like we are anti this kind of game. You have to remember, like, everything's on a life cycle. So knowing like 3 years out, what is that going to look like from there? I think if you're doing a straight clone, I probably don't recommend pitching that. That's probably not going to help you out there. But like, what's your innovation on a genre? We haven't yet seen it in the same level we saw battle royales when battle royales first started kicking off, and it was everyone making a variation on a battle royale, which also had a really high barrier to entry in necessary like user acquisition, which is pretty difficult in that market. But I don't think there's anything we're fundamentally like against besides like, don't make a game that's about violence against women or something of that, like be cognizant of the kind of content you're making. But like, as far as like at a genre level, there's nothing that is off limits to us. But I would recommend always making sure you have, it's is like even Michael has noted, like, why are you making this? What's important about it? Why now? And if it's just like, oh, because Fall Guys in Among Us are popular, but you have nothing more to offer than that, then that's probably not enough of a story, right? There's probably not enough there in your game. So I think everything is open, but know why you're making it, know why now, know why it's different and why it stands out, and why you're the right person to make that. Still stands true for us, right? Like even on a project side, like, why are you going to do this differently or better than someone else? And know that when you're making your game. Like, there's plenty of farming games out there, but like Stardew did it differently, right? And now like you can look at the variations that have come off of Stardew, and it doesn't mean that genre is dead, but you have to know why, because it's just a higher competitive genre. So I generally recommend don't leap into a zeitgeist that's already moving without you. But if that's where your passion is, know why that's where your passion is. But it will be always harder to kind of pitch something that's so zeitgeisty and might already be having its moment now and not ready to have its moment in 2 years from now. So yeah,
good stuff. We've got a few minutes left, so if anybody wants to ask questions, you can do it in the Q&A bit on Pine. But I'm just going to kind of continue that really. So what kind of platforms are particularly good at the moment? I mean, Michael, would you invest in VR, for example, at the moment? Have you looked at any VR projects? Debbie, are you looking at that sort of thing? Or, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from our side, look, we're platform agnostic. So we launch games on all platforms in the same way that we're genre agnostic. There's no genre. We genuinely look for great games by great people, right, that we want to work with. You know, always looking for good content, always looking for great content. I think a good point Lindsey touched on there. You know, I'm sure we all see a lot of games. You know, what's really important is that unique hook, and I think that's what Lindsey was saying. You know, it's fine. It's what makes your game different to what else is in that same genre. A lot of people come along. You know, I've seen so many games that look like Blasphemous is a great example, which is a game that we launched last year, which beautiful art style, did incredibly well. But they had something quite unique, which was the story and the visual side. In the same way, when we look at games like Hell Let Loose, which is on our label, you know, it's a very realistic World War II military simulation and very detailed, very authentic. That's what's made them stand out different within their genres. So I know it's really hard as a games developer. You get incredibly close. You know, it's your baby that you're building, but it really is useful to sit back and say, what makes this different to what else is in that genre, and keep that at the forefront of what you're doing. But yeah, we're constantly looking at all the time in a similar way to what we are doing regarding M&A as well. So it's we're looking for great games and great people. Yeah.
And Michael, are you looking at, are you platform agnostic as well? Are you looking at particular platforms like mobile or, PC with this sort of free-to-play model?
Yeah, I think ultimately I would just echo what Debbie just said. At the end of the day, great teams, great content, platform tends to matter less, right? As long as you're not restricting yourself from the beginning, like you're making Alexa games or something, right? Or I think that's kind of hygiene factor more than anything. Yeah.
Just a quick question about crowdfunding. Is it still of interest to you all if a project was crowdfunded? Is it more attractive to have a project that's just been crowdfunded and kind of has a proof of concept, if you like? Lindsey, would you fund something that had just been crowdfunded as well?
We're open to it. It doesn't change. It doesn't change too much either way. Like, if it's a good idea, that's great to see. If you failed crowdfunding and it didn't gain any traction, that's probably the worst place you could be in, where you put it out there and no one liked it. That's definitely going to be a hurdle, right? To get over. And you might need to address that pretty upfront in your deck of like, hey, we did this. Here's where we've adapted from there, right? Because theoretically, you're trying to prove that your hook is of interest to people, and that's what's making them attached to the game, right? And if that is showing not to be true, that's going to be a rough place to be in. If you have done crowdfunding, often the campaigns these days don't necessarily fill the bucket that you need to complete your game. So we're obviously open to discussing like, hey, you need more money to finish, or the game got bigger along the way, because games never do that. And you need that to be able to finish. Like, we're absolutely open to it. It doesn't prohibit us from anything, but I would say a failed campaign is probably a bit of a hurdle to get over.
Yeah, keep that one quiet.
Yeah.
Don't keep that in your pitch slide. Yeah. Good stuff. I'm afraid we've run out of time for the panel. It's gone by really quickly, but a huge thanks to you three. I'm glad that people can see you. It's probably best that people can't see me and just hear me anyway. But huge thank you. Thank you to Lindsey Rostal, to Debbie Bestwick, MBE, and to Michael Cheung. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good stuff. We're now going to have another quick 5-minute break, and then after that there'll be a 30-minute breakout chat session about games investment, which will take place in the breakout tab on Pine. So click on the breakout tab and join a room, and you can decide whether you use a camera or not at that point. After the breakout discussions, we'll be back at 2:30 p.m. EST with a fireside chat with Cassia Curran, advisor at Wings Interactive. So we'll see you soon. Thank you.